My grandmother showed up at my door at 7:43 on Christmas Eve, with a manila envelope tucked under her arm and snow melting in her silver hair. And she said, "Baby, it's time you knew the truth about your father's money." I didn't even have time to say hello. I stood there in my doorway in my pajamas, the smell of the roast chicken I'd been cooking alone drifting out behind me. And I just stared at her. She was 81 years old and she had driven 40 minutes in a snowstorm to hand me that envelope. That told me everything I needed to know about what was inside it. But let me back up. Because for you to understand what happened that night, what really happened, you need to understand what the 2 months before it looked like. My name is Lyric. I'm 34 years old. I'm a licensed CPA with my own small firm in Columbus, Ohio. I've been on my own since I was 22, paid every bill myself, built everything I have from a starting salary that barely covered my rent and student loans. I'm telling you this not to brag, but because my family has spent the last decade treating me like I was the one who couldn't get it together. Like I was the charity case. Like I was the one who needed to be managed. I have one sibling. My older brother, who I'll call my brother, because honestly naming him feels like giving him too much real estate in my life. He's 38. He's never held a job longer than 14 months. He's been married twice. He drives a truck my father co-signed for and lives in a house my parents helped purchase. My parents have never once described any of this as charity. They describe it as supporting family. When I paid off my own student loans at 29 without a single cent of help, my mother's response was, "That's good, honey." No party, no pride in her voice, just acknowledgement the way you acknowledge the weather. When my brother refinanced his house for the third time and my father quietly covered the gap, there was a family dinner. Steaks. My mother cried happy tears. I noticed, I just never said anything. The Christmas plan had been mine from the beginning. I want to make that clear because later my mother tried to reframe the whole thing, tried to say it evolved organically, and that is simply not true. In October, I called her and said I wanted to host Christmas this year. My apartment isn't big, but I have a good kitchen and I knew what I was doing. I told her I'd cover everything, the food, the decorations, the wine. I just wanted everyone together. I miss them. I actually miss them, which is something I've had to sit with since. Because it's almost embarrassing how much I still wanted their approval even then. She said it sounded lovely. She said she was proud of me for stepping up. I spent 6 weeks planning. I ordered a 12-pound prime rib from a local butcher on Broad Street I'd been saving up to try. I bought my grandmother's favorite candied yams ingredients, the exact brand of marshmallows she used when I was a child. I found the tablecloth my aunt used to use every Christmas before she passed, the cream one with the embroidered holly, at an estate sale, and I laundered it and pressed it myself. I strung lights. I bought a real tree, a 6-foot Douglas fir, and decorated it over 2 evenings with ornaments I'd been collecting since college. I sent a formal invitation to everyone in November, my parents, my brother and his girlfriend, my aunt's daughter, my cousin, who I'm close with. I even sent one to my uncle who almost never comes to anything. I used one of those digital invitation platforms. Everyone confirmed. Everyone said yes. I took December 24th off work. I started cooking at 9 in the morning. At 11:15, my mother texted me. "Honey, change of plans. Your brother found this great deal on a cabin up near Hocking Hills. Last minute thing. Fits all of us. We're going to do Christmas there instead. You should come." I read it 3 times. You should come, like I was an afterthought they'd remembered to include. Like I hadn't been cooking for 2 hours already. Like the prime rib wasn't in the oven. Like the tablecloth wasn't already pressed and laid. I typed back, "I've been cooking since 9. I took a day off work. I planned this for 6 weeks. She responded 11 minutes later, "We figured you'd understand. It was such a good deal. And your brother really needed a reset after the year he's had. You know how he gets around the holidays. I know exactly how he gets around the holidays. I also know exactly how I get around the holidays, quietly, carefully, making sure everything is perfect so that people feel welcomed, so that nobody has to worry about anything. I've been doing that since I was old enough to reach the kitchen counter." I didn't respond. I turned the oven down to warm, sat on my kitchen floor between the counter and the island, and I cried. Not dramatically, not in a way I'm proud of. Just. I cried the way you cry when something you expected to stop happening keeps happening. When you realize you've been telling yourself a story about your own family that they haven't agreed to. Then I got up, washed my face, and I called my grandmother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I knew this was going to happen." Just that, flat and certain, The way she says things when she's been sitting on something for a long time. Did they tell you? I asked. No, she said, they didn't tell me either. So she hadn't been invited to the cabin. She's 81 years old. She lives alone in the house my grandfather built in 1971 in Clintonville, and they hadn't extended the cabin invitation to her either. She found out the same way I did, a group text sent at 11 something in the morning on Christmas Eve informing us that plans had changed. Are you home? She asked me. Yes, don't move, she said. I'm coming. When she walked through my door that evening with the envelope, she sat down at my dining table, the one I'd set for 6 people, still set for 6 people, because I hadn't been able to bring myself to clear it, and she put the envelope flat on the cream tablecloth and pressed both hands on top of it the way you'd steady something that might fly away. Your grandfather wrote this down, she said. All of it. Before he died. He made me promise I'd give it to you when the time was right. She looked at the table, at the extra plates, and she said quietly, I think the time is right. My grandfather passed when I was 19. Heart attack, very sudden, a Tuesday morning in March. He'd been a civil engineer. Worked for the city of Columbus for 30 years. He was careful with money in the way that people who grew up with very little are careful with money. Not anxiously, but deliberately. He knew where every dollar went. He kept records. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, 15 pages, and behind it a set of photocopied financial documents, bank statements, transfer records, a copy of a revised family trust document dated 8 months before he died. I read the letter first. My grandfather had written it in the months before his death, when, it turned out, he'd known something was wrong with his heart and hadn't told anyone. He wrote in careful, even handwriting, the kind that comes from an era when penmanship was taught seriously. He wrote about the family, about my father, about the trust he and my grandmother had built over 40 years. The original trust had been structured equally, split 3 ways: my father, my grandmother for her own living expenses, and a third portion designated for the grandchildren, which at the time meant me and my brother, equal shares, to be distributed when we each turned 30. My grandfather had revised that trust. He wrote that he had watched, over several years, my brother receive financial support from my parents that was systematically drawn from the family's shared resources without transparency. Co-signed loans that went into default and were quietly resolved. Money transferred from my parents' accounts, accounts that were partially funded by a monthly draw my grandfather had set up for them, to cover my brother's debts. He had asked my father about it twice. My father told him it was handled. My grandfather didn't believe him. So he hired a CPA, someone outside the family, to review the account activity. The CPA found that over a 9-year period, approximately $127,000 had been moved in ways that were inconsistent with the trust's stated purposes. Not all of it was traceable to my brother directly, but the pattern was clear. Money meant to accumulate for the family's future had been quietly redirected. My grandfather revised the trust. He left my grandmother fully protected, her portion untouched and managed separately with an independent trustee. He restructured the grandchildren's portion so that my share would be managed by that same independent trustee, disbursed directly to me, with no involvement from my parents. My brother's share was reduced proportionally, with a documented rationale attached, which my grandfather had written himself and had notarized. He also, and I had to read this part twice, had written a letter to my father explaining all of this. A letter that had been delivered by the family attorney upon my grandfather's death. My father had received this letter 15 years ago. My father had never told me any of it. I set the pages down on the tablecloth. My grandmother was watching me. She had a glass of the wine I'd opened for the dinner nobody came to, and she was holding it with both hands, and she looked tired in a way that wasn't about the drive. He knew? I asked. I meant my father. I meant, did he know what he'd done? Did he know that Grandpa knew? He knew, she said. He's known since the week after the funeral. The attorney called him in. Read him the revised document. Showed him the letter. She paused. Your father called me that evening and told me I needed to deal with your grandfather's paranoia. Those were the words he used. Paranoia. I thought about my father. I thought about every Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, where he'd sat at the head of the table and made toasts about family loyalty and sticking together. I thought about the way he'd looked at me at my college graduation, proud but in the distant way, the way you're proud of something you didn't really participate in making. I thought about the last time he'd asked me how my business was going, which I could not actually remember. How much? I asked my grandmother. I meant, How much was I supposed to have received when I turned 30? I turned 34 years ago, she told me. I'm not going to write the number here because this isn't about the money, not really. But it was enough that the 4 years of delayed disbursement, sitting in an account accruing interest, was itself a significant amount. The trustee, who had been managing it quietly and legally this entire time, had been waiting for me to be made aware of the trust's existence. I had never been made aware of the trust's existence. He didn't want me to know, I said, not a question. He was afraid of what you'd do, my grandmother said, and then, carefully, he was also afraid of what it would mean about him. I didn't call my father that night. My grandmother and I ate the prime rib and the candied yams at the table I'd set for 6 people. And we talked about my grandfather, about things he'd said and done that I'd been too young to understand at the time. My grandmother told me about a time when she was young, and her own mother had been cut out of a family inheritance by a brother who had more charm than character. She said my grandfather had never forgotten how that changed her family, how it created a wound that never fully closed. He didn't want that for you, she said. He also didn't tell me while he was alive, I said. There was some bitterness in that. I won't pretend there wasn't. I wish he had. I wish he'd looked at me at 19 and said, there are things you need to know, and you're old enough to know them. He thought your father would come around, she said. He thought the letter would be enough. She looked at her plate. He was wrong about that. People you love are sometimes wrong about important things. That's one of the harder things to absorb. I called my attorney the day after Christmas. She's a woman I met through a professional network, sharp and no nonsense, the kind of person who responds to emails at 10 o'clock at night and doesn't make you feel like you're bothering her. I told her everything. She reviewed the documents my grandmother had given me. She got in contact with the independent trustee my grandfather had appointed, who had, it turned out, sent 2 letters to my parents' address over the years attempting to locate me. Letters my parents had, apparently, signed for and not forwarded. That last detail is what shifted something in me. Up until that point, I'd been holding on to the idea that maybe there was a version of this that was more complicated than it looked. People make mistakes. Financial decisions get murky. Families don't always communicate well. I know all of that. I work with family finances for a living. I know how easily things can get tangled, but signing for a letter addressed to your adult daughter and not giving it to her, that's a choice. My attorney sent a formal letter to my parents in early January. Not aggressive, not accusatory, just laying out the facts. That I was aware of the trust. That the trustee had been attempting to contact me. That I'd be working directly with the trustee going forward to arrange the disbursement I was entitled to. My father called me 3 hours after that letter was delivered. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 7 minutes long. He started with confusion, acting as though this was all a misunderstanding, as though the trust documents were somehow being misread. He moved into frustration. Then, his voice shifted into something quieter, and he said, I just want you to understand that everything we did for the family. Your brother needed more support. You've always been the strong one. We knew you'd be okay. We knew you'd be okay. I've thought about those words more than I've thought about the money, because I think that's the truest thing he said in 7 minutes. They looked at me and saw someone who would be okay, and they decided that meant I didn't need to be looked after. They looked at my brother and saw someone who wouldn't be, and they decided that meant he got everything. What they never seem to ask is what it costs to always be the one who's okay. What it takes out of a person to keep being fine, keep showing up, keep cooking the Christmas dinner, and pressing the tablecloth and buying the prime rib, year after year, while your family quietly decides you don't need anything from them. That cost is real. It doesn't show up on a bank statement, but it's real. I didn't call my father back that day. I texted him, I got your attorney will be in touch. I love you and I also need some time. He didn't respond for 2 weeks. When he did, it was a single text that said, okay. My cousin, my aunt's daughter, the one I'm close with, called me in February. She'd heard pieces from my grandmother. She's a few years older than me, steady and practical, and she asked me directly what had happened, and I told her. All of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I always thought something was off. I never knew what. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her there wasn't, not really. The legal side of things was moving on its own timeline. The emotional side of things was moving on a different timeline entirely, slower and less predictable. What I didn't tell her, because I was still working it out myself, was that the hardest part wasn't the money, and wasn't even the betrayal, exactly. The hardest part was recalibrating. 15 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings and phone calls, all of which I'd been experiencing through one lens, now had to be re-examined through another. Every time my father had said he was proud of me, I'd believed him. I still believe he meant it. I just now also understand that you can love someone and still not protect them. You can be proud of someone and still choose someone else. Those two things live together and they're both true, and holding them both at the same time is genuinely hard. My grandmother calls me every Sunday. She has since I was in college, actually, but now the calls feel different, more honest. She told me in March that she'd carried the weight of that envelope for 15 years, and that handing it to me on Christmas Eve had been the first time in a long time she'd felt like herself. Your grandfather would have wanted to do it himself, she said. He just ran out of time. I know, I said. Don't let this make you hard, she said. That's what I told myself when it happened to my own mother. Don't let it make you into someone who keeps people at arm's length, because you've learned you can't trust them. That's the real damage, if you let it happen. I've been sitting with that. I'm still sitting with it. I don't have a clean answer yet. The disbursement came through in April. The trustee was professional and efficient, walked me through everything step by step, answered every question. My grandfather had chosen well. Watching that account statement come through, seeing the number, the years of documented growth, my grandfather's careful handwriting reflected somehow in the structure of the accounts themselves. I had a moment that I can only describe as grief and gratitude arriving at the same time. Grief that he was gone and couldn't see it. Gratitude that he'd thought far enough ahead to make it possible. My attorney confirmed everything was clean and settled. I thanked her. She told me I was one of the more prepared clients she'd worked with, which I think was her version of a compliment. I haven't spoken to my father on the phone since Christmas Eve. We've exchanged a handful of texts, mostly logistical. My mother called me once in February, and the call was strained and brief, and we both knew it. She said she hoped I understood that they loved me. I told her I knew that. I do know that. I just also know that love doesn't automatically make things right, and that understanding might take all of us a long time. My brother has not reached out. That doesn't surprise me. I don't think he entirely understood what he was a participant in, and I also don't think he wanted to look at it too closely. Some people are very gifted at not looking at things too closely. I've watched him practice that skill his whole life. My cousin and I have dinner every few weeks now. That part is new and good. My grandmother and I have standing tickets to the Columbus Symphony for next season. She went once in the 1980s and said she'd always meant to go back. I found a subscriber package in January and called her, and she cried a little on the phone, which is not something she does easily. I reset my dining table in April. Not for a party, just. I took all 6 place settings out and laid them properly, with the cream tablecloth and the embroidered holly, and I sat at the head of the table alone with a cup of coffee, and I thought about my grandfather. About the fact that he had sat down sometime in the last year of his life and written 15 pages by hand because he wanted to make sure I would be okay, actually okay, not just assumed okay, not assigned okay by people who found it convenient to believe it, but genuinely, verifiably taken care of okay. He ran out of time to give it to me himself, but he made sure it got to me eventually. The table looked good with all 6 settings. I decided I'd have people over soon, real people who show up. My grandmother, my cousin, a few friends from work who I've been meaning to have over for a year. People who come when they say they'll come. That's not a small thing. I understand that better now than I did in December. Sitting on my kitchen floor with my roast in the oven and my phone in my hand, crying because my family had chosen a cabin. It turns out what I'd cooked that Christmas wasn't just for them. It was for whoever was actually going to come, and my grandmother came. That was enough. More than enough. It was, if I'm being honest, exactly what I needed. Even if I didn't know until she walked through the door with snow in her silver hair and an envelope that changed everything, that I'd been waiting for it my whole life.